The town of Havenwood nestled in a valley, a place where the rhythm of life was slow, dictated by the turning of seasons and the familiar faces that passed on Main Street. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least, everyone thought they did. And among those familiar faces was Elara Vance. Elara lived in a small, well-kept cottage on the edge of town. Her garden was her pride and joy, a riot of color and fragrance that spilled over the low stone wall. She moved with a quiet grace, her hands calloused but nimble, her face a roadmap of time and experience. Most saw her as just another elderly widow, living out her days in peaceful solitude. They saw the gentle smile, the kind eyes, the slight stoop of age. They did not see the steel that lay beneath the surface. Her days were predictable. Mornings in the garden, afternoons knitting or reading by the window, and a weekly trip into town for supplies. Her most frequent stop was Miller's Gas and Goods, a small, independent station run by a man named Thomas Miller. Thomas was a man in his late 50s, with a perpetually cheerful disposition and a surprising depth of quiet strength. He always had a kind word, a ready smile, and never failed to offer Elara help with her groceries. One Tuesday afternoon, Elara stopped at Miller's. She was buying a few essentials, but also a small pot of vibrant petunias from a display Thomas kept near the entrance, a splash of color she liked to bring into her kitchen. Thomas, seeing her admire them, simply smiled. "Those are on me today, Miss Elara," he had said, his voice warm. "Saw you looking at them last week. A little beauty for your home." Elara had protested, but Thomas was firm. "Just a small kindness, Miss Elara. We all need a little color sometimes." She had thanked him, touched by his generosity, and carried the petunias home, a small symbol of the simple goodness that still existed in Havenwood. But the peace of Havenwood was not absolute. For months, a shadow had been creeping over the town, a presence that felt alien and menacing. It belonged to Silas Vane and his crew. Silas wasn't from Havenwood, but he had decided it was ripe for the picking. His men, a mix of hardened criminals and local lowlifes drawn to his brutality, had slowly begun asserting their dominance. Petty theft escalated to extortion, intimidation became casual violence. They wore their menace openly, loud and arrogant, cruising the streets in noisy cars, congregating on corners, their presence a stain on the town's quiet facade. They targeted small businesses, demanding protection money, bullying anyone who resisted. Fear was their currency, and they were rapidly becoming rich. Thomas Miller was a prime target. His business was successful enough to attract their notice, and his kind nature marked him as potentially weak. They had started with threats, then vandalism. Thomas, a decent, law-abiding man, had tried to reason, then report them to the local sheriff, a man named Deputy Barnes who seemed perpetually overwhelmed or perhaps, increasingly, compromised. Nothing worked. The day after Thomas gave Elara the petunias, Silas's crew decided to send a stronger message. Elara was on her way home from the market, her shopping bag light, her mind on the pleasant task of repotting the new flowers, when she saw the commotion at Miller's Gas and Goods. Two large, brutish men Elara recognized from their menacing presence around town were standing outside the station's small store. One, a hulking man with a scarred face, was shouting at Thomas, who stood on the steps, his arms crossed, trying to remain calm. The other, younger and wiry, was kicking at the flower display Elara had admired just yesterday. Petunias, geraniums, marigolds, pots shattered on the asphalt, spilling soil and torn blossoms. Elara stopped, her heart giving a small, sharp lurch. The sheer casual destructiveness, the blatant cruelty, ignited something deep within her. It was the same cold fire that had burned in places far from Havenwood, in times she had tried to forget. She walked closer, her steps slow and deliberate. The scarred man shoved Thomas hard. Thomas stumbled back, catching himself on the doorframe. "You think this is a game, old man?" the thug sneered, his voice gravelly. "Silas Vane don't play games. You pay up, or next time it ain't just flowers we break." The younger man laughed, grinding his heel into a particularly vibrant petunia plant. "Leave him alone," Elara said, her voice quiet but clear. The two men turned, their eyes sweeping over her dismissively. The scarred one chuckled. "Well, well. Looky here. Grandma wants to play hero." The younger one snickered. "Go home, Granny. This ain't your business." Thomas looked horrified. "Miss Elara, go. Please, just go." Elara ignored him. She looked at the shattered pots, the ruined flowers, the fear in Thomas's eyes. Then she looked at the two men, their arrogance a tangible thing in the air. "This is my business," Elara said softly. "You are harming a good man, and destroying beautiful things. That makes it everyone's business." The scarred man stepped towards her, towering over her slight frame. "You got a lot of mouth on you for an old lady," he growled, reaching out a massive hand as if to shove her aside. Elara didn't flinch. Her eyes, which had seemed gentle moments before, were now sharp, focused, and unnervingly cold. As the man's hand came towards her, she moved. It wasn't a fast movement, not a blur of speed, but a precise, almost deceptively simple shift of weight and angle. She stepped just inside his reach, parrying the arm aside with her left forearm while her right hand shot out, not punching, but targeting a specific point on his wrist. It wasn't a hard strike, but the effect was instantaneous. The man cried out, a choked, surprised sound, and his hand went limp, useless. His eyes widened in shock and pain. Before he could even register what had happened, Elara's left hand flicked out, finding another point, this time on his neck, just below the ear. Again, not a heavy blow, but delivered with perfect placement. The giant's eyes rolled back, and he crumpled to the ground like a sack of potatoes, unconscious before he hit the asphalt. The younger thug froze, his sneer dissolving into stunned disbelief. He stared at his fallen companion, then back at Elara, who stood calmly, her expression unchanged. "Get him out of here," Elara said, her voice still quiet, but now carrying an undeniable weight of command. "Tell Silas Vane that his disrespect will no longer be tolerated in Havenwood." The younger man swallowed hard, his bravado completely gone. He glanced nervously at the unconscious thug, then at Elara, his eyes darting around as if expecting more elderly ladies with terrifying skills to appear. He mumbled something unintelligible, half-dragged, half-carried his companion to their beat-up car, and sped away, tires squealing. Thomas stared, speechless. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes wide. He looked from the retreating car to Elara, who was now calmly bending down to pick up a salvageable pot of petunias, carefully brushing the soil from the roots. "Miss Elara," he finally stammered. "What, how?" Elara straightened, holding the damaged plant. "Some things," she said, her gaze distant for a moment, "you don't forget." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken questions. Thomas looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not just an elderly widow, but something far more formidable. His fear of Silas Vane's men was momentarily eclipsed by sheer astonishment at Elara Vance. When the two thugs returned to Silas Vane, their story was met with immediate, furious disbelief. Scarface was still woozy and complaining about his arm, while the younger one stammered out the tale of being taken down by an old woman. Silas Vane was a man whose ego was as vast as his cruelty. He saw himself as untouchable in Havenwood. The idea that some little old lady had not only stood up to his men, but defeated one with apparently zero effort, was an insult of the highest order. He paced the room, his face contorted with rage. "An old woman? You're telling me a damn grandma put knuckles on the floor?" "Yeah, boss. Just touched him." Like this, the younger thug tried to imitate Elara's movement, but it was clumsy, ineffective. He just went down. Silas stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. This wasn't the kind of story you made up. There was fear in the younger man's eyes, not just the usual fear of Silas, but a genuine, bewildered terror of Elara. "All right," Silas said, his voice dangerously low. Maybe she got lucky. Or maybe she's got a little more spunk than she looks. Doesn't matter. Nobody makes my men look like fools. Especially not some ancient busybody. He leaned forward, resting his hands on a table littered with empty bottles and drug paraphernalia. This changes things. She thinks she's tough. We'll show her what tough is. We'll lean on that gas station owner again. Harder this time. And if the old lady shows up? Well, make sure she doesn't walk away this time. The challenge had been issued. Silas Vane, accustomed to fear and submission, saw Elara Vance as an anomaly, an obstacle to be crushed swiftly and brutally. He vastly underestimated the depth of her capabilities and the fire she carried within. He didn't know that by targeting her, he had awakened a force far more dangerous than anything he had ever encountered. Elara knew the incident at Miller's was just the beginning. Silas Vane's type didn't back down from a challenge, especially one delivered by someone they considered beneath them. His ego wouldn't allow it. She had drawn a line in the sand, and he would cross it. She spent the next few days not gardening, but observing. She watched the patterns of Silas's men, their hangouts, their vehicles. She noticed the subtle fear in the eyes of townspeople when those vehicles passed. She saw the increased police presence around Silas's known haunts, but also the way the officers seemed to look the other way when actual trouble was brewing. Deputy Barnes was decent, she thought, but the sheriff? Something wasn't right. Her investigation wasn't obvious. She didn't tail cars or use fancy gadgets. She simply walked through town, sat on park benches, had quiet conversations with shopkeepers and residents, her sharp eyes taking in everything, her keen ears picking up snippets of conversation, rumors, hushed warnings. She learned the extent of Silas's operation was far greater than simple extortion. There was drug trafficking, moving product through Havenwood to larger markets. There was coercion, forcing young people into distribution. And there were whispers of something darker, something involving vulnerable people who suddenly disappeared. She also confirmed her suspicion about the sheriff. He was on Silas's payroll, providing tip-offs about law enforcement movements and burying complaints. Deputy Barnes, she learned, was often sidelined or sent on pointless errands when Silas was active. This wasn't just a local gang anymore. This was organized crime embedding itself in the heart of Havenwood, poisoning it from within. One evening, Elara walked down a quiet street towards the back of Miller's Gas and Goods. Thomas was sweeping up the debris from the attack, his face grim. When he saw her, he stopped, leaning on the broom. "Miss Elara," he said, relief and apprehension warring in his voice. "Are you all right? They didn't come back after you left." "I'm fine, Thomas," she replied. "But they will be back. And Silas Vane will escalate." Thomas sighed, looking at the mess of shattered pots. "I know. I don't know what to do. I've called the police, but they," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Thank you, Miss Elara. For what you did the other day. I've never seen anything like it." Elara looked at him, seeing the worry etched on his face, but also a flicker of courage ignited by her actions. "Thomas, you were kind to me. To others. You represent the best of this town. We can't let men like Silas Vane take that away." She paused. "You were in the service, weren't you, Thomas?" Thomas blinked, surprised. "Yes, Miss Elara. Army. Mechanic." "How did you know?" "Small things," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "The way you keep your tools, the set of your shoulders sometimes. I spent some time around military types myself, a vast understatement." "Thomas," Elara continued, her voice dropping slightly. "Silas Vane is more than just a couple of thugs. He's organized. He's got connections. The sheriff is compromised." Thomas's eyes widened. "I suspected as much. Barnes is a good kid, but he's boxed in. We need to deal with this ourselves, Elara stated simply. But I can't do it alone. I need people I can trust. People who understand what's at stake. She looked at Thomas directly. I need your help. Your knowledge of this town, your skills, and your courage. Thomas looked at the ground, then back at her. The fear was still there, but the flicker of courage had grown stronger. He thought of the ruined flowers, the threats, the fear in his customer's eyes. He thought of the quiet, unassuming woman who had felled a giant with a touch. My skills are just fixing engines, Miss Elara, he said. Mechanical knowledge is valuable, Elara replied. Vehicles, security systems, maybe even, other things. And courage comes in many forms, Thomas. You have it. He hesitated for only a moment longer. All right, Miss Elara. I'm with you. What do we do? Their conversation stretched late into the evening, a strange alliance forming under the pale glow of the gas station lights. Elara shared some of what she knew, enough to impress upon Thomas the gravity of the situation without revealing the full extent of her own background. Deputy Barnes, Thomas said at one point. He hates Silas. He's a good man, but he's young, and the sheriff keeps him on a tight leash. Maybe we could. Elara nodded slowly. Perhaps. He needs to know he's not alone. But we need to be careful. We can't risk alerting the sheriff. They made a plan to cautiously approach Barnes, gauge his willingness to stand up to the corruption within his own department and the threat outside it. Meanwhile, word of the incident at the gas station spread through Havenwood like wildfire. Exaggerated tales of the little old lady, who took down two of Silas's toughest men became local legend, whispered in hushed tones. For some, it fueled fear. What kind of trouble had this strange woman brought to their doorstep? For others, it sparked a tiny, fragile ember of hope. If she could stand up to them, maybe, just maybe, they weren't invincible. Silas's response was swift and brutal. He wasn't just going to threaten Thomas again, he was going to make an example. Late one night, Miller's gas and goods went up in flames. The fire department arrived quickly, but the old building was extensively damaged. Thomas stood across the street with Elara and a small group of shocked townspeople, watching his livelihood burn, the orange glow a stark contrast to the quiet darkness of Havenwood. They want to scare us, Elara said, her voice low. They want to prove that standing up has consequences. Thomas's face was streaked with soot and tears, but there was a hard glint in his eyes Elara hadn't seen before. They messed with the wrong town, he said, his voice rough with emotion. And they messed with the wrong people. This act of blatant terrorism galvanized some in the community. The fear remained, but it was now mixed with righteous anger. The destruction of a beloved local business, owned by a respected man, was a step too far for many. Elara knew this was the moment to solidify her allies. The burning of Miller's wasn't just an attack on Thomas, it was an attack on the very spirit of Havenwood. The day after the fire, Elara and Thomas met Deputy Barnes in a secluded spot outside of town. Barnes was young, earnest, and clearly distraught by the events. I wanted to be there, Thomas, Barnes said, his voice heavy with guilt. But the sheriff sent me clear across the county on a fake call. By the time I got back, it was too late. We know about the sheriff, Deputy, Elara said gently. Barnes looked startled. You do. We do, Thomas confirmed. And we know you're not like him. We need your help, Deputy. The people of Havenwood need your help. Elara explained the extent of Silas's operation as she understood it, the drugs, the potential human trafficking, the corruption reaching into local law enforcement. She spoke of Silas's arrogance, his certainty that he was above the law. He thinks he owns this town, Elara said. And with the sheriff in his pocket, he almost does. But he underestimates the people here. He underestimates you, Deputy. And he underestimated me. Barnes listened intently, his face growing harder with each word. He had suspected much of this, but hearing it laid out, confirming the sheriff's complicity, was a shock. "I swore an oath," Barnes said finally, looking at his hands. "To protect and serve the people of Havenwood. Not to protect a criminal and serve corruption." He looked up, his eyes meeting Ilara's. "What do you need me to do?" Ilara outlined the risks. Standing against Silas meant standing against the sheriff as well. It could mean the end of his career, or worse. "I understand the risks, Miss Ilara," Barnes said, his jaw set. "I'm in. Whatever it takes." With Barnes on board, they had an invaluable inside source within law enforcement, someone who could provide information, navigate the system, and potentially rally other honest officers, if any existed. Ilara also reached out further. She made contact with an old acquaintance, a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a former colleague from her past life, a master of communications and intelligence. He was older now, running a seemingly mundane tech consulting business, but his skills were still sharp. She briefed him on the situation in Havenwood, explaining the nature of Silas's criminal enterprise and the compromised local authority. Marcus, a man who valued justice and loyalty above all else, agreed without hesitation. He couldn't be physically present in Havenwood without drawing too much attention, but he could provide invaluable remote support, hacking into Silas's digital communications, tracing financial transactions, gathering intelligence on his contacts and operations outside of Havenwood. He could also create digital diversions and interference when needed. "Consider me your eyes and ears, Ilara," Marcus had said over their encrypted channel. "And a thorn in Silas's digital side." The alliance was growing, Ilara, the quiet force of nature, Thomas, the steadfast local with practical skills, Deputy Barnes, the honest lawman navigating corrupt waters, and Marcus, the unseen hand providing crucial intelligence. Silas Vane, meanwhile, was consolidating his power, blinded by his success and the perceived weakness of the townspeople. The burning of Miller's gas and goods hadn't sparked widespread revolt as he'd feared, it had seemingly reinforced the fear, driving people further into submission. He lounged in the back room of a seedy bar that served as his headquarters, counting stacks of cash from recent collections. "See," he sneered at his lieutenants. "Burn down one measly gas station, and they scatter like roaches. That old woman? Probably halfway to the next state by now." He received a report that someone had been asking questions around town, gathering information. He dismissed it. Probably some nosy reporter. Lean on M. Remind M this town ain't talking. He was too arrogant to consider that the nosy reporter might be the quiet woman who had already bested his men once. His drug operation was expanding, requiring a larger shipment than usual. He planned to bring it through Havenwood in 2 nights, a massive amount of product that would solidify his position and fund further expansion. The sheriff had assured him the route would be clear, patrols diverted. This was his major move, the linchpin of his growing empire in the region. He didn't know that Ilara and her nascent team were already aware of the shipment, thanks to Marcus. The stakes were suddenly astronomically higher. This wasn't just about protecting Havenwood anymore, it was about disrupting a significant criminal network and saving potentially countless lives downstream. The weight of the escalating conflict pressed down on Ilara, but it also sharpened her focus. She convened a meeting with Thomas and Deputy Barnes, a clandestine gathering held in the old, unused back room of the town library, a place no one would think to look. Marcus joined via a secure audio link. Maps of Havenwood were spread out on a table, marked with known gang hangouts, patrol routes, and potential choke points. Marcus provided details on the planned shipment, route, estimated time of arrival, number of vehicles, likely escort. "This is bigger than we thought," Barnes said, running a hand through his hair. "Silas isn't just a local thug, he's connected to something larger. Which means taking him down disrupts their whole chain," Ilara said calmly. "But it also makes us a bigger target. We have one chance to hit them hard, cripple their operation, and expose the sheriff." Ilara outlined her plan. It was audacious, relying on precision timing, leveraging their limited resources, and exploiting Silas's overconfidence and predictable tactics. "Thomas, you'll handle the vehicles," Elara instructed. "You know these roads, you know engines. Marcus will give you remote access to traffic cameras and any vehicle transponders he can tag. We need to slow them down, divert them. Deputy Barnes," she continued. "Your role is critical, and dangerous. You need to gather any hard evidence you can on the sheriff's corruption, documents, recordings, anything. Get it secured. When we make our move, you'll be the one to coordinate with the state police or federal authorities, someone outside the sheriff's influence. We hit Silas, and you expose the rot within the department." Barnes nodded, his face serious. "I understand. I've been building a file, just in case. It's hidden away safe. Marcus will provide us with real-time intelligence," Elara said. "Their movements, communications. He'll also create diversions, spoofed calls, false alarms, to draw away any patrols the sheriff might send our way. Consider it done." Marcus's voice crackled over the link. "And me?" Thomas asked. "You," Elara said, a glint in her eye, "will help me set the trap. Silas needs to be drawn out. He won't abandon the shipment entirely, but his ego will demand he confront whoever is disrupting it. We need to create a situation he can't ignore, in a location we control." They discussed potential locations: the abandoned mill outside of town, the old, derelict cannery by the river. They weighed the pros and cons, the sightlines, the entry and exit points, the cover. Elara's tactical mind, honed over decades in far harsher environments, was evident as she calmly analyzed each possibility. The plan solidified: disrupt the shipment, cripple Silas's finances and supply chain, expose the corrupt sheriff, and force Silas into a confrontation on their terms. It was risky, requiring perfect coordination and trust. "This is it," Elara said, looking at each of them in turn. "We're fighting for Havenwood. For good people like Thomas, for honest officers like Deputy Barnes, for everyone living in fear. Silas Vane thinks he's untouchable. We're going to prove him wrong." Thomas, Barnes, and even Marcus via the link, felt a surge of resolve. This unassuming elderly woman had ignited a fire in them, a willingness to fight for what was right, regardless of the odds. They were committed. Just before they dispersed, Elara spoke, her voice quiet. "What we are about to do carries significant risk. People could get hurt. Or worse. If anyone has doubts." "No doubts, Miss Elara," Thomas said firmly. "They burned my life down. I'm ready. I'm doing what I swore to do," Barnes added, his voice steady. "My past taught me that silence in the face of evil is complicity," Marcus stated from the speaker. "Not an option." Elara nodded, a look of deep respect on her face. She didn't smile, but her eyes held a warmth that touched each of them. "Then let's get to work," she said. "Havenwood is counting on us." As the plan took shape, Elara couldn't help but reflect on how she had ended up here, in this quiet town, preparing for battle once more. 20 years ago, she had been known by a different name, operating in shadows and conflict zones across the globe. She had been one of the best, a ghost, a whisper, a highly skilled operative whose job was to go where others couldn't, do what others wouldn't. It had been a life of intense purpose, but also immense cost. The scars, both visible and invisible, were a constant reminder. The loss of her team, her chosen family, in a mission gone wrong had finally driven her to seek a different kind of peace. Havenwood had offered that peace. Anonymity. Quiet. A chance to simply be Elara Vance, gardener, widow. She had thought that part of her life was over, the skills carefully packed away, the instincts suppressed. But in justice, she had learned, had a way of finding you, no matter how deep you buried yourself. Seeing Silas Vane's casual cruelty, witnessing the fear he instilled, watching him destroy Thomas's livelihood, it had cracked the carefully constructed facade of her retirement. The cold fire had ignited again, the sense of duty overriding the desire for peace. She hadn't sought this fight. It had found her. And now that it had, she wouldn't back down. Not when innocent lives and the soul of a town were at stake. She wasn't the young operative she used to be, but age had brought different strengths, patience, perspective, an understanding of human nature, and a deep well of resilience. Her body might be older, but the muscle memory was still there, the tactical mind still sharp, perhaps even sharper, unclouded by youthful impatience. She thought of her late husband, who had known parts of her past, though never the full extent. He had understood her need for quiet, had supported her search for peace. He would have hated what Silas Vane was doing to Havenwood. He would have told her, in his gentle way, that some things were worth fighting for. Her personal history, her past trauma, wasn't a burden in this fight, it was the forged steel that had prepared her. It was why she couldn't turn away. Alright everyone, before things really kick off, let me know in the comments where you're watching this story from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. If you're enjoying it, please hit that subscribe button, it helps us tell more stories like this one. Tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The night of the shipment was cold and clear. The air in Havenwood was thick with unspoken tension. Silas Vane's men were on edge, anticipating the arrival of their valuable cargo. Elara and her team were in position, a small, unseen force preparing to strike. Thomas was stationed outside town, near a key intersection on the shipment's projected route. He wasn't armed, but he had his tools and access to the camera feeds Marcus was providing. His job was to create a vehicular problem, a strategically placed breakdown that would force the convoy to slow down or reroute towards the abandoned mill, the location Elara had chosen for the confrontation. Deputy Barnes was at the sheriff's office, ostensibly on late-night duty. He was tense, every nerve ending firing. He had copied the sheriff's files, hidden them in a drop point for Marcus to retrieve digitally. Now, he waited, ready to make contact with the state police the moment Elara gave the signal. The risk he was taking was immense, but his resolve was unshakable. Marcus, miles away, sat before a bank of monitors, a ghost in the machine. He tracked the shipment, monitored local police frequencies, the sheriff's controlled ones and others, and ran interference, creating digital noise and false reports to misdirect attention. Elara was positioned near the abandoned mill. The old building was perfect, derelict, full of blind spots, rusted machinery providing cover, and multiple entry/exit points Elara knew how to navigate in the dark. She was alone, armed only with a few non-lethal deterrents and her formidable skill set. She was the bait, and the primary strike force. The shipment convoy arrived at the edge of town, 3 dark SUVs moving silently. As they approached Thomas's location, his breakdown, an old, sputtering truck strategically stalled across most of the narrow road, came into effect. The lead SUV honked, then its occupants, 2 of Silas's men, got out, yelling. Thomas, feigning frustration, apologized profusely, fumbling with the hood of his truck. Marcus, seeing this on a camera feed, initiated stage 1. A sudden, loud explosion-like sound echoed from a different part of town, coupled with a static burst on the gang's comms frequency Marcus was jamming. "What the hell was that?" yelled one of the thugs. "Probably just a transformer," the other said, though he sounded uncertain. "Get this clown out of the way." They tried to physically move Thomas's truck, but Thomas, leveraging his mechanical knowledge and some pre-planned minor sabotage, had made it just difficult enough. The delay was working. Silas, monitoring via phone from his headquarters, grew impatient. "What's the holdup? Get that road cleared." Marcus sent a spoofed message, seemingly from one of the men at the roadblock, "Road completely blocked. Can't move it. Rerouting via Old Mill Road." Silas cursed. The mill road was longer, bumpier, less secure. But the main road seemed impassable. "Fine. Reroute. But don't stop until you're at the mill." The convoy reluctantly turned, guided by their GPS, which Marcus had subtly manipulated to prioritize the mill road as the only viable alternative. They were heading into Elara's trap. As the SUVs bounced down the rutted mill road, Elara moved like a phantom through the shadows of the derelict buildings. She heard the vehicles approaching, their engines groaning. They pulled up outside the main mill structure. The men were nervous, suspicious of the unexpected delay and the eerie silence of the location. "Check it out," the lead man ordered, gesturing to the mill entrance. Two men cautiously approached the dark opening. As they reached the doorway, Elara struck. It wasn't a frontal assault. From the shadows above the entrance, she dropped onto the first man's back, a blur of unexpected force. Her weight was light, but precisely applied, driving him forward and down. As he fell, she used his momentum, twisting, her legs sweeping the legs out from under the second man. Both hit the ground hard. Before they could recover, Elara was on them, applying quick, precise pressure points. Groans, then silence. The men in the SUVs heard the muffled sounds, then nothing. "What was that?" "Go check," yelled the man in the second SUV. Two more men exited, weapons drawn, approaching cautiously. As they entered the mill, Elara used the environment to her advantage. She moved through the labyrinthine interior, a master of infiltration and close-quarters combat. One man was taken down silently from behind, a chokehold applied until he lost consciousness. The other was disarmed and disabled with a swift, brutal series of strikes to his limbs and joints. From her concealed position, Elara reported back to her team via a secure comms link Marcus provided. First wave neutralized. Proceeding with disruption. Thomas, monitoring from a distance, felt a surge of nervous energy. Barnes, listening at the sheriff's office, held his breath. Marcus smiled grimly at his screens. Inside the third SUV, which contained the bulk of the shipment, the remaining men were growing agitated. They couldn't contact the lead vehicles. "Something's wrong," one muttered. Suddenly, the alarms in the mill blared, a deafening, piercing sound echoing through the valley. Marcus had triggered them remotely. "What the hell? Let's go." The third SUV, carrying the drugs, tried to back out, but Thomas had placed a spike strip just behind it moments before, using the distraction of the alarms. The tires blew instantly. Trapped and exposed, the remaining thugs spilled out of the SUV, looking wildly around for the source of the attack. Elara, still concealed, used the chaos. She wasn't trying to engage in a prolonged firefight, her goal was disruption and neutralizing key players. She moved from cover to cover, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. A thrown object, a heavy bolt found in the mill, precisely hit a man's arm, making him drop his weapon with a yell. Another had a quick, disabling blow delivered from the darkness. But these were Silas's more dedicated men. They reacted with violence, firing blindly into the shadows. Elara avoided their panicked fire, her movements economical and fluid, honed over years of surviving hostile environments. One particularly vicious thug, Silas's lieutenant named, which, for his nervous energy and quick temper, spotted a fleeting movement. He opened fire, bullets ricocheting off the old machinery. Elara ducked behind a large rusted press. This wasn't sustainable. She needed to draw Silas out, as planned. Using a voice modulator Marcus provided, she broadcast a message over the gang's open frequency: "Silas, your operation is finished. The sheriff is exposed. Your men are taken. It's over." Back at his headquarters, Silas went ballistic. He had received fragmented reports, confusing data streams from Marcus's interference, but nothing clear. Now, this message, delivered in a voice that sounded distorted but carried an unmistakable air of authority. "Exposed? Taken," he roared. He looked at the remaining men around him. His best guys were with the shipment. He had a few left, but not many. He had to go there himself. He couldn't let that much product fall into the wrong hands. And he wouldn't let some unseen enemy, some old woman or whoever it was, think they could beat him. "Get the car," he yelled. "We're going to the mill. And we're going to show them who's in charge." He grabbed his preferred weapon, a heavy, ornate pistol. He was fueled by rage and wounded pride. He was walking directly into the trap. Deputy Barnes, hearing Alara's message and Marcus's confirmation that Silas was mobilizing towards the mill, knew his moment had come. He sent a coded message to the state police major he had discreetly contacted weeks ago, detailing the situation, providing the location, and attaching the file exposing the sheriff. "Sheriff," Barnes said, his voice trembling slightly, but his eyes resolute. "There's a major incident at the old mill. Silas Vane is heading there. Large drug shipment. Possible hostage situation." The sheriff, bleary-eyed from being woken up, rubbed his face. "What? How do you know this, Barnes? I thought that route was clear." "Intelligence came through," Barnes said, using a phrase Alara had suggested. "I've already alerted the state police. They're en route." The sheriff bolted upright. "State police?" Barnes had gone over his head. The file. Had Barnes sent the file too? His face turned purple with rage and fear. "You double-crossing little punk. You think you can?" "I swore an oath, Sheriff," Barnes interrupted, standing taller than the sheriff had ever seen him. "To the people. Not to you." The sheriff lunged for his desk drawer, where he kept a personal weapon. Barnes was faster. He drew his service pistol, not pointing it at the sheriff, but holding it defensively. "Don't do it, Sheriff. It's over. You're done." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The state police were arriving. The sheriff stared at Barnes, then at his drawer, his face a mask of impotent fury. He knew he was caught. At the mill, Alara had secured the disabled thugs and the drug shipment, moving everything into a reinforced section of the building. She waited, listening. Marcus confirmed Silas's arrival, along with a small, heavily armed contingent. "He's here, Alara," Marcus's voice was grim. "Looks like his personal guard." "Understood," Alara replied. She took a deep breath, her posture shifting subtly, the unassuming widow disappearing, replaced by the coiled readiness of a predator. Silas and his remaining men stormed the mill, weapons raised. They moved aggressively, confidently, expecting resistance but not the silent, deadly efficiency they had already encountered. "Vance!" Silas roared, his voice amplified by the cavernous space. "Show yourself, you old hag. You think you can touch Silas Vane's business?" Alara didn't reply verbally. Instead, she used the environment. A strategically cut cable caused a section of scaffolding to collapse with a deafening crash, momentarily disorienting them. A burst pipe unleashed a torrent of cold water in a narrow corridor they were attempting to traverse. Small, unexpected obstacles that broke their formation and exposed them. Her allies were active elsewhere. Thomas, now having cleared the road, was helping guide the arriving state police, pointing them towards the mill and away from Deputy Barnes's location, ensuring Barnes had time to secure the sheriff's office. Marcus continued to jam the gang's communications and provided Alara with updates on their positions within the mill via her comms link. Silas's men were skilled, but they were used to brute force and intimidation, not fighting a ghost on unfamiliar ground. Alara moved with purpose, targeting the leader of the guard, a man even larger and more heavily armed than Knuckles. She used distraction, misdirection, then closed the distance with blinding speed. A quick, devastating sequence of joint locks and pressure points, and the man was down, neutralized before he could even fire a shot. Silas saw his lieutenant fall and snarled, firing wildly in Alara's direction, though she was already gone, melting back into the shadows. "She's playing games," he yelled, frustration mounting. "Find her. Search everywhere." His remaining men spread out, becoming isolated in the complex layout of the mill. Alara picked them off one by one, using the same devastatingly effective, non-lethal techniques. A dislocated shoulder here, a temporarily paralyzed limb there, a swift strike to the temple rendering a man unconscious. She didn't kill them, she dismantled their ability to fight, leaving them helpless. Soon, only Silas remained standing amidst his fallen guard, his chest heaving, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. The mill was silent again, save for the sound of his own ragged breathing. "Where are you?" he screamed into the darkness. He was losing control, his overconfidence shattered, replaced by a primal fear he hadn't felt in years. Elara stepped out from behind a large boiler, into a sliver of moonlight filtering through a broken window. She stood calmly, her hands empty, her expression unreadable. Silas whirled, raising his ornate pistol, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and rage. You did all this? You old witch. It's over, Silas, Elara said, her voice steady, unwavering. You lost. You underestimated this town. You underestimated the people in it. I'll kill you. Silas shrieked, squeezing the trigger. Elara moved. Not away, but towards him. A blur of controlled movement, angling to avoid the shot, closing the distance in a heartbeat. Before Silas could fire a second time, she was inside his guard, her hand a whip crack of motion, striking his wrist just as she had done to Knuckles at the gas station. The pistol clattered uselessly on the concrete floor, his hand going numb. Silas roared, swinging a wild, desperate punch with his other hand. Elara evaded it effortlessly, stepping in close, delivering a sharp, focused strike to his solar plexus. Silas gasped, his breath knocked out of him, doubling over. Elara followed with a precise blow to his jaw, ending the fight. Silas Vane crumpled to the ground, unconscious, his face twisted in a mask of defeat and disbelief. The sirens outside were much closer now. The state police swarmed the mill moments later, finding the incapacitated gang members, the massive drug shipment, and Silas Vane lying defeated at the feet of a small, gray-haired woman. Deputy Barnes arrived shortly after with the sheriff in tow, the sheriff handcuffed and looking utterly humiliated. Barnes presented his evidence to the state police commander, solidifying the case against both Silas and the corrupt sheriff. The night was long, filled with the necessary cleanup, statements, and securing of evidence. Thomas arrived at the mill, seeing the scene, his face a mixture of relief and awe as he looked at Elara. "You did it, Miss Elara," he said, his voice full of reverence. "You really did it." Elara simply nodded, watching as Silas Vane was loaded into a police car. The fight was over. In the days that followed, Havenwood began to heal. Silas Vane and his remaining active crew were behind bars, facing serious charges. The sheriff was arrested and swiftly suspended, facing his own corruption charges thanks to Deputy Barnes's courage and Marcus's secure handling of the evidence. Deputy Barnes was hailed as a hero, a beacon of integrity in a compromised department. He was quickly promoted to acting sheriff, a role he accepted with humility and determination to rebuild trust. The drug shipment was seized, a major blow to the network Silas was part of. Marcus's intelligence had also helped authorities in other jurisdictions make arrests related to Silas's contacts. The community of Havenwood, initially fearful, began to emerge from the shadow of Silas's gang. The burning of Miller's gas and goods had been a scar, but it also became a symbol of their resilience. Townspeople organized fundraisers, pooling resources to help Thomas rebuild. People who had lived in fear found their voices, sharing stories of the intimidation they had endured, strengthening the case against the arrested gang members. Elara Vance didn't seek recognition. When reporters descended on Havenwood, Deputy Barnes carefully steered the narrative, crediting anonymous intelligence and community cooperation, while subtly highlighting the role of brave citizens like Thomas Miller. Elara remained in the background, the quiet widow tending her garden. But those who had seen her that day at the gas station, or who had been part of the small, courageous team that took down Silas Vane, knew the truth. Thomas started rebuilding his station, painting it a brighter color, planting new flowers, petunias among them. He often looked towards Alara's cottage with deep respect. Deputy Barnes, now Sheriff Barnes, would occasionally stop by Alara's place, not for official business, but just to talk, to seek quiet counsel. He knew she saw things others didn't. One morning, Alara found a handwritten letter in her mailbox. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. To Alara Vance, it read. Thank you. For standing up. For reminding us what courage looks like. For protecting our town. You earned our respect, not with force, but with the strength of your conviction and the kindness you defended. Havenwood is forever in your debt. It was signed, simply, the people of Havenwood. Alara read it, her hands trembling slightly. A rare, genuine smile touched her lips, reaching her eyes. She hadn't fought for thanks, or for fame. She had fought because it was necessary, because injustice demanded a response. But receiving this quiet acknowledgement, this understanding from the community she had protected, meant more than any medal or commendation ever had. The peace she had sought in Havenwood had been disrupted, but in fighting to restore it for others, she had found a deeper, more meaningful peace within herself. She was no longer just a widow seeking solitude, she was a protector, a catalyst for change, a quiet guardian. The old mill stood silent now, a monument to the night Havenwood fought back. The scarred asphalt at Miller's Gas and Goods was being replaced. New petunias bloomed brightly outside the rebuilt station, a symbol of resilience and hope. Alara Vance returned to her garden, the earth cool and familiar beneath her hands. The quiet life she had chosen was still hers, but it was richer now, connected to the town she had saved, to the people who had found courage alongside her. She had proven that true strength isn't about how loud you are, or how much fear you instill, but about your willingness to stand for what is right, no matter the odds, no matter who underestimates you. Havenwood was safe, not because of its isolation, but because when tested, its people, led by an unexpected hero, had found the strength to fight for it. The shadow of Silas Vane was gone, replaced by the dawning light of a community reborn, stronger and more united than ever before. Up next you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.